So listen, what I proposed for intersectional tech is not what intersectional tech became. I'm terrible with proposals and I also think that I ran into the issue of writing, especially since I struggled, I wanted to write something that I thought an acquisitions editor would want to hear. I was like, I think they might like this, instead of thinking about what my project is, I'm like, this seems hot and sexy and I think they might like this. And that's completely the wrong way to like do it, And I think that's probably why like I had struggles, because people, I'm writing about it and then people are like, okay, Shauna, is this really what you want to do? I'm like, I don't know. Is it? Do you like it? So, I struggled, like a little bit with that, just trying to like get my book writing confidence up, because book writing is completely different from like, like article writing, right? I mean, I will say, because I did want to mention, this might be a good place to talk about that. The only reason why I did those edited volumes is that I got the advice. I don't know if it was good advice or not good advice, but I did Woke Gaming because I don't know if it was an acquisitions editor or somebody that said, Kishana, since there's not really like a field around this, critical race and gaming, an edited volume is like a good way to like get that out in the world. So that's one of the reasons that, we did Woke Gaming, so people could see that there was like this critical race, feminist intersectional perspectives, that were happening like around gaming. And then having that book be legible, would make it a little bit easier so people could say, hey, there's something to latch onto. So that's really the reason that I did edited volumes. Now they didn't count, they don't count for anything, for tenure and promotion, so, I did that one and also like feminism and play, because there's just like some voids, I think, gaming studies had not caught up to like these critical perspectives and ways of thinking inside game studies. So that's the only reason why I did those. But I would say they helped a whole lot. But, that first proposal for like intersectional tech, I knew that I wanted to, to focus a lot like on intersectionality, I wanted to focus on what Black folks were doing inside the gaming space. But I didn't know what that story would be, especially because, my methodology like is ethnography, so I'm like, I can, take a snapshot of some data at any point, but, the snapshot, from 10 years ago looks different from 5 years ago. That looks different from like a year ago. So I think it was really hard. I'm like, I don't know what story I'm trying to tell right now. And I think you just got to be honest with yourself. So when I started out writing, I didn't know how intersectional tech was going to end up. I just didn't. I just trusted the process. I trusted myself, but I also trusted that, the data is there. I'm just trying to make that legible to these academic audiences, apply some frameworks, to it. And, I think that it turned out okay. Now it was a very stressful process, right? Especially like when you're thinking about like putting the stories together and putting the pieces together, like a lot of times it don't seem like that they're going to fit it all, but trust yourself and just keep writing, and I think as long as you have like good drafts, you can always go through and, figure out like, that narrative and that weaves together like the whole argument. But also for me, I was just weighing and taying in the wind. A lot of times I'm gonna be totally honest. I'm just writing.
Says though she is not a prolific author so frequently as she's working on like book number 5 or 6 right now. But I think she raises an important point about the distinction between a monograph and an edited volume. That's important for us to just quickly get to. And I know, Kishana, don't do an edited volume as your first book, baby, right? Was kind of the advice because that doesn't count for tenure. But I think what you pointed out was so important, that edited volumes do important work for careers, even if they don't necessarily get you tenure, right? So Kishana is so well known in the field because she's the person who edited the collections on her area, right? That everyone had to know her in order to get their work published. And so they can serve some really valuable networking possibilities and some really like field and groundbreaking possibilities. And also, a way to get to know senior scholars in your area, as letters are required for the tenure process as well. So a lot of reasons to do those, but maybe a lot of reasons to not, that's not to be the first thing that you do. You said something that I would love to be teased out a little bit more, which is that writing a book, of course, is so different than writing a journal article. And I'm not sure that we all totally understand that, right? So maybe many of us here have only written journal articles so far. What is so different about writing a book than writing a journal article?
You want me to answer that? You want me to speak to that?
Sure. Then maybe Raven can jump in too.
Yeah, I think the biggest difference that I saw was that whenever I'm writing books, I feel like I'm telling stories. like really in like this narrative prosy kind of way. It's almost like, I always talk about, Tyrell is like, one of the like in the anchoring story, like in an intersectional tech. And I was like, I just want to tell your story. One day, Tyrell, he played the game and then this happened and this happened. Like it was really like, kind of like narrative, storytelling, which is why I kind of fell in love with like writing books, because I valued that. Whenever I think about like article writing, it seems so prescriptive, like the way where it's like a template, like you have to have the intro, then you have to have, the theoretical framework, then you have your method section. How did you design it? So it seemed too much like technical writing. Like for me, articles are very technical writing, but it was also when I got that advice, it was also very useful for me. Because then the writing of an article wasn't so tedious, because I was like, okay, it's, I just fill in the blanks here. I'm gonna fill in the blanks here, whereas, book writing was completely different. I have more feelings and emotions, whenever like I'm doing the book, because, I'm telling like these stories. I hope that helps. That's just how I see it, like from my perspective.
I would just add to that, everything Kishonna just said. I would just add, I actually got reader reports from my sample chapters saying, the sample chapters read too much like a journal article. They wanted more stories, to Kishonna's point. They wanted more like feeling into it. So it was kind of freeing. Like I don't think I had ever written before, adding my, like, what do I feel about this? And I can sort of add my subjectivity to it. To give an example, a concrete example, one of my chapters has focus groups with Black women talking about care networks online. And the reader wanted stories about how the focus groups came together, which is not something you would necessarily put in a journal article. I mean, you would say how you recruited the women, but you wouldn't necessarily say the story about who the women were, right? Not demographics, but how they related to each other, who the women were, like that sort of a nuance and detail I was able to put into the book. And I hope it makes it, a richer project.